Welcome back to Cornerstone's Pastors Podcast. This is Pastor Scott, and with me again are Pastors Brian and Matt.
Dang it. Matt and I stared at each other and were waiting for the other person. It was just a big nonverbal miscommunication.
It was not a
and
miscommunication. Brian and I just stare at each other often. You guys can't hear it, but we are just often staring at each other. Are you going to fix this one and go back and re-record?
Nope.
All right.
We don't do that.
Oh, I just saw you typing something.
No, all of a sudden I realized I didn't have actually the questions I was supposed to ask in front of me.
Oh, okay.
And I had already hit record.
Yeah.
So,
well, it's a good thing that Brian stared longingly into my beautiful blue eyes.
No going back. Push through.
Once you hit
once you hit record, push through.
Everyone loves this at the front end. I feel like this is what people listen for.
Yeah.
And we should just keep it going because it won't get old.
It won't. I have
That's Matt's theory of humor.
My theory of humor is that if it gets old, if you keep going, it becomes new again.
Is this kind of like if you're bored, it's because you're boring, right? If it gets old, it's because you're old. Is that the?
No, I think it's just that that you just have to be confident, and that's what makes something funny. Confidence.
You know what our world needs a lot more of right now?
Confidence.
I feel like the world in general is lacking confidence, and what it really needs is just someone who would strongly affirm a position.
I think I would go one step further and say not just confidence. I think the world needs my confidence. I feel like that's what's most needed.
Oh,
it's hard to find someone that thinks they're right these days.
But my life really is just lived in the context of musicals. Like, we're talking about confidence, and all I can think of is a song from Sound of Music. This is what happens to me.
Is it The Hills Are Alive?
No. I have confidence in confidence.
Is that from the sound?
The Hills Are Alive with The Sound of Music. It's in the name.
Besides what you see, I have confidence in me.
You guys thought that Scott singing a couple weeks ago in the service was the last time you were
No way,
hear
man.
That.
I've been let loose.
He's loose.
How committed are we to the once the record button's hit?
I'm confident it's going to go well.
All right. We're going to try today to talk about questions about regathering together physically as a church family. You should have gotten an email kind of explaining just a bit of where we're at, getting a bit of an update
with some pictures.
You may have been relieved. You may have been disappointed that there wasn't a firm date in that email. But we thought that in addition to an email, it might be helpful just for you to hear us talk a little bit about the thought process that goes into that, what we're taking into consideration, and how we're trying to determine the best ways forward in the midst of continually changing situations, continually changing guidelines and regulations. I think even continually changing research, right? As we learn more, as the world learns more about how coronavirus spreads, about the dynamics of it and things like that. I mean, this is a very fluid situation, and we get the privilege of trying to make decisions in the midst of that.
We are flying by the seat of our pants.
For sure.
And praying a lot.
Yeah. Which does, I think, bring a really sweet dependence on the Lord, and has brought a sweet dependence for all of us on the Lord. And just as we continue to, thinking of James, just seek wisdom. So why don't we take a step back from all of the different variables and just talk first about why we think meeting together physically is important, right? Is there an urgency to do so? Is there an urgency to meet together physically, or should we just be as safe as possible? And if anyone ever has a cold for anything, they should just visit a live stream. And is live stream the new way that we should be doing church, or is there an importance in the physical gathering?
No, there's not the new way of there's no. And I think for a lot of people, you guys like to joke that I've been practicing social distancing for a lot of years now. But I think for the, the introverts among us, for people who tend to get even drained kind of by being around other people, even though we love them, I think now is the time everyone realizes the importance of this, of being together physically, of how you can't just sort of chop people up into, brains and minds and hearts and bodies and just sort of do different things with different pieces. Like, we're whole people, and to worship together and to be together and to be the family of God and to do anything corporate, we can't do it apart forever. Like, this has to be a stopgap. This has to be a Band-Aid. This can't be a new normal. And while there's always going to be people who, for some reason or other, can't come to a physical corporate gathering on any given Sunday, the idea of just kind of giving up on the importance of it or the beauty of it or the necessity of it and saying, well, let's just go with it because it's more convenient, I think now is the time everyone realizes that's just not going to work. And we could go into all sorts of details on why that is, but at the end of the day, it's super important for us to get back together.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because we're juggling competing priorities and principles in this time where, yes, it's very important to get back together. And there is, I would say, the question is there an urgency to do so? And I would say, yes, there's an urgency to do so because of the things that Brian just talked about. There is a need for us to be together, not just spiritually from a distance, but physically. There's a need for us to be physically in the same room, worshiping together. There's something powerful and irreplaceable about that. And yet at the same time, there's also a lot of caution and care that we have to do that well and properly. And that's kind of the tension we're trying to walk, is those two things together.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's really interesting because as embodied souls, right? I think this is an aspect of how we were created to relate to one another, right? We were created to relate to one another in person, right? We were created to relate to one another physically, and to worship together corporately, physically, to sing to one another, to see one another, to
be hugged by Estrellita.
Absolutely, absolutely.
We need that.
We do. I mean, I think we were created for that. That's what God wants to. That's what He wants for us as the church, and so I think there absolutely is this urgency that we don't want to just kind of put it off, and just wait. Which I think begs the question then, like, why aren't we meeting now, right? Like, technically, if at the very least it's allowed in the state to do so. What are the factors at play in why we didn't meet together last week?
So the official rule right now is 25% capacity, social distance, mask. There's a bunch of rules. They have like a whole document.
That's in the state of California, right?
And in the county.
And in the county.
And the county, I think, is like reflecting the state's rules. I think the state's rules say you shouldn't sing. The way I read it, also, it's complicated. The way I read it was a preacher should wear a mask. I don't know. There's a lot of things like that we're trying to figure out.
To be fair,
yes,
it's like one of the worst formatted documents I've read. I love the state government, and I'm all for the regulations.
I thought you were going to say, to be fair to the state government, they didn't have a lot of time to put it together. But you said you went the other direction.
That's fine too, but they put it out. I mean, this is like
it's chaotic.
It is. I mean, yeah, even the guidelines.
Yeah, and so we're doing our best to try to follow the spirit of kind of what they're aiming for. The reality is, the reason, apart from construction, the reason that we're not meeting right now is we haven't figured out. We're figuring out, and we're in process of figuring out how to do this safely and carefully the right way, and how to take the proper steps back to where we are meeting in person. That's in process. We're working on those things, but right now there's a lot of things we don't know, and a lot of things we don't know how we would do to properly follow the regulations in order to actually facilitate a worship service in person. And so that would be my answer. Brian, I don't know what your perspective would be.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of priorities that we're trying to juggle. I think it's just kind of at some point, I know I personally, and I think we all feel the urgency to be together again. And would love, if it was possible, would love to kind of rewind and just have never had it interrupted, and be able to maybe take some of this new perspective and never, it was 2 weeks off. We realized, we really need this and jump back into it. But that's not been the case. And so we feel that urgency. But we also, we need to love our neighbor as ourselves. It's just kind of the thing we keep coming back to, and to be able to figure out how to do it well, and to realize that, it doesn't take much. a mistake in this is not sort of like, well, okay, we'll learn next time. Like, people can get really sick. People can get really hurt by this virus. And we want to just make sure that we're being appropriately careful and wise in how we walk towards being together again, so that we're able to be together with urgency, and also to make sure that we're protecting each other with urgency.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just a really complicated thing to do.
Yeah. I mean, I know of churches where, right, like if they've showed up together and somebody tests positive, and now, it's off for 3 weeks because they'd all been together, and there's kind of this back and forth. And you know what? We might experience that, right? Like that might be a reality. I think we're going to try to figure that out as we go forward.
And will be part of the plans we make
exactly
going forward.
Exactly, making sure that we have the contingencies for those things.
I think there's something to be said about how we gather together again when we do gather together again, whether it's able to be like an actual church service. The idea of, for example, one of the regulations being potentially not singing or something like that, right? Which is, singing seems to be something that there's experience of spreading in a very significant way when they're singing. The idea of like a church service without singing isn't a church service. And so there's things that we want to do to make sure that when we do gather, that we're actually able to worship the way that God has called us to as a body. And so that's where the pausing is. It's not, there's not like an overwhelming sense of fear or like any of that that's guiding us. It's being careful and cautious and appropriate in the midst of something that's complicated.
Yeah. And I think in the midst of that too, we're trying to serve the body as a whole, right? We are a really diverse family. We're with all sorts of different concerns and dangers and vulnerabilities. We're a multilingual family, right? And so it's not enough to simply ask the question, how do English speakers gather together again? Or how do we allow for English speakers to gather and have a live stream? But like we need 3 different live streams every Sunday morning. If we're going to gather in person, we want to gather in 3 different language groups right away, right? Like we want to serve one another and walk in this as one body, as one family, serving and caring for one another, and that takes another, another level of complexity that we're trying to navigate and do in love. Again, not in fear, but in love.
And coincidentally, we have giant scaffolding in the sanctuary and no pews and stuff everywhere.
Even if coronavirus was gone tomorrow, we wouldn't have met last Sunday.
In person,
Yeah.
in the same way, in the sanctuary.
Yeah.
It just, So that's, that should be wrapping up, in the next month or so. But
yeah, the goal is for that to be wrapped up by the end of June.
But anyways, that's like, that is also a significant factor for us that we want to make sure everything's ready to come back to.
Yeah, absolutely.
I will say another sense of urgency that there's a reality to the fact that we know, I've said this in a Sunday service, but we know not just what it's like to be in the service, but what it's like to participate at home. And I want to say that for a lot of the people out there watching or out there listening right now who have been participating and worshiping with us on the live stream. We, as your pastors, have experienced that. We know it's hard. It's hard. So like, we're not coming from this, this morning Brian preached and I got to see him preach in person. And I'll say another thing. He looks a lot better in person than on the live stream. Personally, that's a personal opinion.
Less of a glow off the
another urgent request to get in is to see Brian in person. But the reality is, like, we know that it's really hard to like have your heart fully engaged from home. And so I want to like sympathize with that and acknowledge that and say we understand the difficulty of that. And so we feel that tension there and that urgency there and understand where you're coming from. Those of you who are very eager.
Yeah. Okay, so just to clarify, we kind of talked about it, but for those that don't like reading my emails, but are willing to listen to this while they, wash the dishes or something like that.
What about 7-minute budget presentations?
Oh man, I've got a 20-minute version coming out this week. Man.
Is there a way we can identify how many views that 20-minute one gets?
Oh, Don't you worry.
I'm very.
I will track it.
I have like 3 people in the church I know that are really eager.
Actually,
for that.
can I've got a little gift, a little Easter egg
Ooh.
at the end of the
Can't
budget
tell them where it
video.
is, man.
For those that watch all the way to the end, well,
Somewhere in the
somewhere in the
presentation.
video.
somewhere in the video, it's a little, just a little,
Cat's out of the bag,
just a little
Scotty.
like you've watched all the way, so this is for you.
Are you gonna dance or sing or?
It's all I got.
You
It's all I'm
are
giving away.
here.
It's all I'm giving away. It's all I'm giving away. All right. So
what are we
for those who don't love all the email, what are we doing?
What are we-
Brian,
We're losing it, everybody.
I feel like Brian just like verbalized like my life right now.
I feel like
Wait, what
I really want to know what the Easter egg is at the end of the budget video, but I don't want to humor you by watching it now because of that. I'm very torn.
It's tough.
Okay.
All right. For those who don't love may have not read the actual email, can we just clarify, Brian, what is the plan as it stands right now?
The current plan is to continue with the live stream as the main or like focal way that we are worshiping together for the current time period. And as construction wraps up towards the end of the summer, begin to invite people to attend in a kind of appropriate and safe and guideline respecting way, like attend the live stream in the sanctuary, and then slowly over time from there build back towards, as the regulations change and as more information comes, build back towards a what we would consider like a normal service together with no restrictions or guidelines to follow. Now, how long that takes, who knows? But the idea is that we can begin moving towards that towards the end of the summer.
Got it. So, you want to add anything?
Lots, but that's okay. So go ahead.
So what do we say to people who hear that and feel like that's too slow? Say like, you know what, man, like I wish they'd make different decisions.
Sure.
Like that seems overly conservative to me. It seems too slow. Like I want to be back now.
I mean, I think the first thing we say is, I get it. Like, I mean, like, yeah, I do too. Like, absolutely 100%. There's nothing in me that says, let's do more Sundays with like a couple cameras and like 3 people in the room. There's nothing in me that wants to keep doing that as either what I'm seeing at home or what I'm doing on campus. So the first thing is, I completely understand. The second is, there are certain things that where our hands really are just tied at the construction is just a factor. Like it would be impossible to do it on a faster timeline right now. So that's just the reality of the situation. But lastly, and probably most importantly, is that we're, as much as we want to be together, we really are trying to balance these priorities of safety and respect and submission and a posture of humility towards our government, as well as just not be rash. And one of the things, wisdom in the Bible talks a lot about being rash and about jumping into things because especially things that are good in and of themselves, but that it wasn't wise to go that quickly. And so with an abundance of counselors and with us trying to figure it out as well as we can and praying for wisdom, we're trying to not be rash without prolonging it more than necessary.
Yeah. And we have, and we know because we've talked to all you. We hear where everyone's coming from. We have people in this church who basically haven't left their apartments since the lockdown order, and for understandable reasons. And we have people who think it's all massively overblown, right? So that we serve all of you, and we love all of you, and our goal is to try to help all of you and serve all of you well. And so there's not like a prioritizing one group over the other. We love every single person in this church, and we understand that there's complicated, complex situations that each of you find yourself in, and we want to serve you most and lead you most appropriately towards what Christ-likeness looks like in a really complicated season. So we're not like overly leaning one direction or the other. We're trying to guide us forward in the way that that wisdom would call us to, which I think the idea of making too hasty decisions or decisions that we're not ready to make yet. And I think also another thing that Scott mentioned earlier, we are 3 languages at the church, and there's a lot maybe more complexity to the way that our churches and services work on a Sunday with multiple languages than other churches that maybe only have one language. The campus is used by multiple different groups, multiple different people at different points, and we're all one family together. So we're meeting and making these decisions and talking through these things together, and those are huge factors. So our goal in this is to serve our community as a whole as we make these kinds of decisions.
Yeah.
And that's the posture, I think, to add another thing to say to someone in that position. And I know that people like that are listening. We just encourage you to not focus on how you might not be getting what you would like or think is appropriate as quickly as possible, and focus on the fact that this is a way of loving other people. Like this is we're called to sacrifice for our family, and
consider others more important than yourself. Right?
Yeah,
It's
I mean,
hard,
and that's a hard thing. Like again,
Yeah.
I'm with you. I don't want it to take this long. I don't think anyone does. But it's going to be a lot harder for me to walk through that if I'm just thinking about what I'm being deprived of. It's a lot better, a lot more Christ-like, and just a lot more appropriate to the family of God to look and say, there's multiple different people here for various reasons who me waiting a little bit longer is a means of serving and loving and in humility and care.
Can I say one thing as well? We're talking specifically right now about the church services. We've also slowly begun opening up access to the campus to be used for community group meetings or other things like that. And there are guidelines with that. If you have questions about that, I'm the contact for that. You can email me or call me. I'd love to answer questions you might have about that. And then we'll actually have someone. I don't know if we should direct them to go to me for now.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
great.
Yeah.
And
we'll start there.
but it's something
Yeah.
that we want to make in-person gatherings, even not on a Sunday service, something that's available to you, and we want to encourage you towards that in a safe way. So we've provided those guidelines, and if you have questions about that, I'm here, and you can always email me or call me on that side of things.
I should have included that in the sense that like what we're doing. Like I think that the idea is that there would be there's not no movement right now. Like there is movement towards more in-person kinds of interactions as
Smaller
a church
groups.
body. So ideally we begin to explore that now, so that's been explored by the time we're able to explore attending the live stream. Like so it's not like we're saying it's a giant pause right now on everything. And that's a really important point, Matt. I appreciate you bringing that up.
Okay, so and I think that's super helpful. What about the other side, right? What about those who feel like even maybe the opportunity to connect with people in your community group, or even the prospect of thinking about gathering together physically in July, like feels too fast? Like, what about those that are like on the other side and feeling like, man, I'm still super nervous about this. Like I feel like what the church is doing actually is too fast for my sensibilities or my conscience.
Like we're being foolishly quick in our decisions.
Yeah.
I mean, I think again, I would say like I kind of get that too. Like as someone with what Matt calls mild diabetes.
I've got mild asthma. He's got mild diabetes.
But I mean, my whole life.
Just
as
to
a
clarify,
diabetic,
that's not a real thing.
Yes, he's joking. It's a joke. It's a joke.
Brian
it's a
loves
well-intentioned
me.
joke.
Yeah.
We're cool.
I'm not a terrible person.
But my whole life has been, like on any label, on any warning, it's always like pregnant people and diabetics, and like so like my whole life has been spent kind of like being a little extra aware of what's going on around me in terms of health and things like that, and for this, like it's in some ways there's not a lot of like data one way, but the idea has been like I have a risk factor. And so for me, it's not just like any young, healthy person like running out and hanging out with people. So I am thinking about like, okay, 5 kids, like all these things, like what does wisdom look like for me in terms of my level of exposure? I know my wife's thinking about that. Like, so the first thing to say for me is like, I get that. Like, I'm not looking to like say this is no big deal and just kind of run and well, it's time. It's been a while. We'll just go for it. I'm very cautious about that. And I think that on top of that, you have the same kind of ideas just kind of run the other way, where the reason that we think this is appropriate is because we are listening to the science and the experts and the state government that seems to have our best interests in mind in putting these things out. And we are trying to do it in a way that keeps people safe. We're not throwing caution to the wind just to get back together. We want to be able to be together and be safe. And we think there's a wise way to do that. And one of the ways moving forward is to consider that this approach is also a way of loving someone else. And last thing I'll say before I throw it to one of you guys is there are going to be some of you that won't come the minute it's opened up. And that's going to be a wise decision for you. Like, all of us are in different places, not just in terms of our comfort level, but in terms of our health, in terms of all sorts of different things, our exposure.
Age.
Like there's tons of different reasons why some people might not come. We're not saying you have to come the minute it's opened up. We're saying we think it's wise to open it up for some people on this timeline. And
that is why, by the way, we are going to, when we open up, it's basically going to be inviting people into the live stream, because the live stream is continuing to go and will be not just like an add-on to the service, but will still be a significant central component of the service for a lot of people for probably a long period of time. And so it's going to change the in-person experience in that way, but it's also we don't want to diminish or say that your worship is less valuable because you're live streaming because of health issues or your comfort level or whatever it is. We want you to be able to come back here to the campus confident that you're going to be able to worship safely, and that's really, really important. And the other thing I'll say in this whole kind of, we didn't touch on this, but there's still a lot of questions out there about kids and families, and not everyone in our church has kids and family, has kids or is part of a family in that sense. But for those who are, the question, if you have young kids right now, the restrictions say you have to stay with your household. There's no childcare or Sunday school allowed. These are questions that we still don't have answers to, that we want to have more clarity on before we can make those decisions. My assumption is a lot of the information is going to start coming out closer to when school is coming around. But because obviously those are related, and some of the practices there might be something that we apply here, but we don't know. So we have to be cautious and wait on that side of things as well.
Yeah. So
kids in general seem to be very not affected by this.
I mean, it's a big question.
But the spread of it and a lot of other things, there's still questions. I have thoughts on those things, and I'm trying to keep an eye on the data and everything. But at the same time, we have to be very careful of that.
Yeah, and I think that's where I think that we ought to give grace to even the governing officials trying to make these decisions with the constantly updating information, and in light of that, we ask for your same grace in understanding with us that I think everyone in our entire society is working we're just continuing to learn more and more and more about this virus,
and grace for other churches and how they approach things.
Absolutely. And I think this hits at, and this is why this is so important. I think this hits at, to me, one of the biggest dangers in the midst of this, which is that this would be a season of disunity for the church. And whether it's this or even just the last couple of weeks and everything that has gone on in the wake of George Floyd's death, this is a time where the church, and I think in our church, the church generally, and the local church in particular, is at great risk for disunity because we're not together physically. And so all we're doing is having these conversations in the echo chambers of social media, in the midst of and so you even hear everything you hear from other Christians. You hear the things that we are saying as your pastors through this lens, right? Through this divided lens that is shaped by the divisiveness of our world. And I think even conversations about when the church is going to regather get
politicized.
Yeah, get politicized, get become wedges for division. And that is a tool of Satan in all of this. I mean, there's no other way to put it. What God longs for his church is that in times like this, we would serve others, we would sacrifice for others, we would extend grace towards one another, and that increasingly his church, his family, his body would be united, right? With one mind, one soul, because of our one Savior and God, right, in Jesus Christ. And this is, I think, a time where there is a great deal of temptation towards disunity because we're not having these conversations in person, looking into one another's eyes. We're not having to deal with the filter of saying something to your face. We end up just mulling over things on our own, and I think that it oftentimes the temptations in the world take root. I think that's part of what we see going on in the world at large. It just reinforces those divisions, and that the church, God created the church to be different, to be distinct from the world in significant ways, and this is one of the most significant ways the church is to be distinct from the church, not just in our morals, but also in our unity, in our love. I mean, we are supposed to be distinct from the world in our morals. I'm not downplaying that. I'm saying in addition to that, our in unity, in love, in sacrifice, in kindness, and in humility. And I think everything that we are walking forward to needs, the tension of the season needs an extra dose of that because of the dangers and the temptations that come with being physically separate.
And I think some of that is related to like pre-existing ideas or the lenses through which people can view the world. Mm-hmm. And some of it is also related to the fact that over the last 3.5 months, lots of people have had radically different experiences.
Yeah. And
not everyone has experienced the last 3.5 months or the last 2.5 weeks the exact same way. And we got to have grace for each other in the midst of that. My experience and what I've felt and experienced over that time period is not exactly how everyone else has seen or understood or experienced it. Yeah. And so I need to just take a pause and not impose myself on everybody else and say, how do I serve and love this community in the unity of Christ and his Spirit in this time frame? And that's what we would encourage everyone to do in this context, and that's what we're aiming to do as well.
Well, that takes you back to the thing. I mean, we just keep saying it over and over again, but you cannot put your roots down in headlines and social media and then touch your Bible and expect this to all work out and for you to be able to give that kind of grace. Like you have to, with as much as capacity as you have, put your roots down in communion with God.
That's the wisdom pyramid.
It's the wisdom pyramid, yeah. I mean, like you have to, and it's scalable in a sense for someone who's absolutely slammed because they're still trying to homeschool and do whatever else, and there are a million things going on. Like putting your roots down might look like a certain bit, and then for someone who's, got a lot of extra time because working from home hasn't been that crazy or whatever, it's more time. But like whatever it looks like for you to put your roots down, the roots of your heart into Scripture, prayer, communion with God, and let your interactions with everything else flow from there versus putting your roots down in everything else and then touching the Bible or saying some prayers. That's just going to fundamentally change the way you react to even this conversation. And so for all of us, this is not a time that God's going to meet us on the other side back when things are the way we want them to be. God's with us in this now. And we need to be with him and know that he's doing some winnowing and he's got things for us and he's not absent and he's got learning and growing and for us to do, and he's got glory to show us, and that's real. And if we don't do that, we will be lost and tossed around and a lot more easily frustrated, and it's easier to get judgmental in a really bad way. It's easier to look at others with no grace because our roots are in something that cannot sustain us.
Yeah.
It also happens to be an election year, so that will probably help with the divisiveness as well. And so all of those principles of rooting yourself in God and his word and his truth first and foremost are going to be really, really crucial, not just through this, next month or whatever, but through the next 6 to 8 months of our country going through a lot, and our cities going through a lot, and our communities locally going through a lot. There's going to be a lot of rootedness and communion with God that is going to need to drive all of us as we try to be faithful to Christ.
And this is the season, in some ways, to take advantage of it. I think it's really, it's not always as easy to see what you're rooted in. But when things have kind of gone sideways in a lot of different ways, it becomes a lot more visible where you're putting your roots down for your stability and like what, in a weird way, that kind of strange way that God tends to do certain things. Like there's a hidden sort of blessing in the midst of things that are genuinely bad, and a hidden sort of kind of growth that can happen for you and for us, which is you have a chance now. Like, be kind to yourself. Look to put your roots down, whatever that looks like for you, in your communion with God and your relationship with Him, to ground yourself in Him and in Jesus Christ by the power of the Holy Spirit, and think about what that might mean as we head towards a season where it might get even more divided and more easy to not show grace. Like, how great would it be if you look back at this season as a time when you took God up on His offer to say, I'm here to put your roots into, to ground you, to make you like a tree planted by streams of water, to make a lot of shade, and that's going to bear fruit later on.
And I would say that is also why we're doing the summer seminar discipleship pathway classes. And if you're looking for a place to start, it's a great place to start. Starting next week, sign up, or whenever this is released this week, right? So it's starting this week, and root yourself in Him.
Oh man, it's such a sweet reminder, even just for me. It's refreshing to hear, and and as you're listening, I hope that you both hear that, and I hope you are hearing us say that we love you and we miss you, and we are doing everything we can to depend on God and take each step forward. And we're going to make some mistakes in that. We're not going to do that perfectly. So we thank you for your grace, for extending the same grace that we know we have from Christ. And we just want to thank you in advance too for striving for that kind of rootedness, so that we can manifest that kind of unity, the kind of unity that makes the church look radically different from the world around us, because that's who Christ has created us to be. So thanks.
One last thing. If you have questions, let us know. We're an open book on any of this stuff.
Yeah, anything.
We're happy to talk about it.
For sure. And you don't have to have done all your rootedness to come
to have a question.
No, you're
frustrated, you're concerned, anything. We are an open book. We want to talk to you. We love you, and we're happy to talk about and discuss any of this.
That's good. All right. We'll see you on Sunday.